Hello, everyone. Welcome to one more episode of our podcast, Real AI Now. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Tobias Zwingmann. He's a book author, an AI book author. He's an AI advisor. He also is also a managing partner at a company called RAPYD.AI, where, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Tobias, you help organizations adopt AI in different ways. So welcome, Tobias, and thank you for joining us today. I would jump right into it and ask you a question. In your book called AI Powered Business Intelligence, you actually bring two things together: AI and business intelligence, which I find very interesting. What is it? What is it that motivated you to do that, and what is actually in the core of that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, Paulo, thank you so much for having me. So it's really great being on this show and looking forward to a fun discussion. And yeah, I think the topic that you just brought up is at the very heart of why I actually wrote that book, AI Powered Business Intelligence, last year, which was actually before ChatGPT came out. So everything is like handwritten, like 0% AI content in there. I
That's
guarantee.
important nowadays.
It's important. Yeah, you have to point that out these days. No, but back to the topic, like why, like, did I choose to write this book, and also the barrier that you mentioned between data science or AI teams and business intelligence is because I see that, and myself included, from my own experience, like I've worked as a data scientist for more than 5 years in a larger like corporate setting, and I realized that one of the main hurdles that models are not being put into production is also like organizational resistance, things
Mm-hmm.
within an organization that make it really hard to put a model out. And especially if you have a BI department, which it hasn't always been there, but like for quite some long time. And then you have like
Mm-hmm.
all these data science and AI people that maybe joined the company, or at least this department was just built a couple of, maybe sometimes even months back. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have this group of people saying, hey, like we can now do forecasts much better than you, right? This creates a fight within the organization, which I
Yeah.
think is not good. So because in the end, like what do those like two teams want to do? They want to solve problems with data. So actually they share the same goal and the same objective. So
Yeah.
my whole point was to try to like bring those teams closer together by breaking those down barriers between them. So
Mm-hmm.
and this goes in both directions actually. So this goes to the
Right.
business intelligence team, enabling or empowering them to adopt like data science tools and data science tool sets, which luckily become more and more commoditized by the day. Just think of technologies like AutoML, for example. It's very easy kind of nowadays to train these models, to deploy them if you are working, for example, in a larger cloud ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So every large cloud provider has these tools out there. So that's one direction, but the other direction is also like looking at data scientists and AI departments and actually bring them closer to what does the business actually want to know, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
BI people spend a lot of time on, like gathering requirements, what kind of KPIs should we build, what's actually useful and valuable. And because for BI teams very often there's yeah, it's much harder to like bring these like dashboards or these KPIs to the final or to the organization
Mm-hmm.
out there. Like there's a lot of effort and discussions going on around there, like what KPIs do we need, how should we define this or that KPI, whereas data science teams often go and say, oh, okay, what's a customer? Just let's query this customer table. Let's just come up with our own definition. But in the end, there are probably like 10 different definitions of what a customer is in the organization.
Right.
So things like this, right? So, and I think it's really important to bring these people closely together and, yeah, sharing similar tools, but also sharing a similar language, I think is key for this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the goals for this book.
Okay. So, can we talk a bit about that? How do we do that? I can bring a bit of my own experience to the table. This was like, let's say, 10 years ago. I was working for a large company in the insurance space, and there was a very well established BI function together with the data warehouse team. basically making the foundation work. Then there was the BI team doing the analytics and the dashboards and all that for business and making those available for business. And then we came, essentially. And we were the new kids on the block, basically, full of ideas. We had a part of the team working on NLP at the time, natural language processing, and the other part doing working on predictive models for quantitative data, structured data. And we were kind of the new kids on the block with the new toys. There was this exactly this clash that you described. We didn't work well together. That didn't work very well. So, in your experience, how can you actually bring those things together? Because I remember seeing that, okay, for the BI guys, we were just a new type of analytics. So from their perspective, we just needed, we were just a new type of analytics. So we should work with the data that they have, that they provide, and we should just build on top new type of analytics using the tool set and all. From our perspective, we had all these cool new tools where we could be very fast, and they used legacy technology, and they were very slow and had very slow and established processes. So a data scientist could be very fast in developing a model using some CSV file that he got from somewhere, and then this would be very shiny, very fast. But then when it came to reality, that wasn't real live data from the company. And so there was a conflict, and that also, in my experience, made it difficult for AI models to go live, to go to production. Do you also have this kind of experience? So I'm guessing I asked many questions. First, what is your experience with that, and how do we bring those teams together? And second, do you share the experience that I just described?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Also a tough one because I think there isn't really a short answer you can give this. Because what's the underlying conflict there? Like two things. I mentioned the first one, which is organizational conflicts. Very often these two teams are parts of different parts of the organization, different departments or different units. So this like inherently makes it difficult to like overcome that, because if you want to collaborate, you have to build a cross-functional team that takes an like organizational effort or maybe a project. So there's a certain structure that comes around this, which of course you can do if you like if you form a project and just work together. But that's one thing. But the second aspect is culture. And for culture, I think, you mentioned the different tools of different languages, but I think what comes on top of that is really a different mindset in terms of working. Because for BI teams, at least for the past almost decade, they were more used to work in these very I wouldn't call it waterfall methods, but very much like requirement oriented, right? There was the business saying, okay, we want to have this KPI. The BI team goes calculates the KPIs or like prepares the data, and then just shows that to the end user. Whereas with data science, like at least in the very early stages, the outcome was not really sure. Like a lot of data science teams were hired of saying, hey, we have a bunch of data, like please go do something useful with that. So
Right.
and in order to do this, you had to, of course, like adopt a completely different mindset. You had to make experiments. You had to like bring some ideas up or build some prototypes and see if something sticks, if something does not stick. It was very hard because there was not that hard business requirement, at least for many companies. There
Right.
might be those companies where you say, okay, for us, it's clear, like we run a big e-commerce shop, like we want to improve our recommendations online, that's why we do data science. But like at least in settings where I worked in, like I would call that like mid-sized companies, maybe like 1,000 employees plus, but not like these super large tech companies. Especially in B2B, like data scientists were hired because there was this promise that data science could unlock some kind of value which was kind of hidden or buried inside the organization.
Right.
And then like this is a culture clash, because like when you ask the data science team, like what do? They said like, oh, we're just figuring out. Like we're just trying to build something which is valuable. And I think like overcoming this kind of culture clash It's really, really different. So, and the question is like, where do you start? And if you ask me, I think it's much easier, like just from an organizational perspective, because you can do things. You can do two things. You can either take the data scientists, try to move them closer to BI, or you can take the BI guys and try to like, bring them a little closer to the data science world. And I found it much easier to kind of like empower the BI people, because what the BI people have is they typically have a very solid and thorough understanding of the underlying data, and also they have access to the productionized data systems and data warehouses. What they are missing, though, is just the like
Mindset.
conceptual, yeah, the mindset and the conceptual knowledge of like what data science is actually doing, and the tools to do this.
And
But
some
I
of
would,
the skills as well.
yeah, and some
Yeah.
of the skills. But I would argue it's kind of much easier to like explain what an AutoML tool is doing to a BI guy instead of trying to onboard the data scientists who often they don't actually have an interest into learning like all the legacy stack that the company is actually running on, and trying to explain them how to now, okay, how do you integrate your model into Power BI, right? Very often they don't want to do that. It's like they just want to like deploy their model as an API or build a Shiny app or whatever. But like when you hire these data scientists or like the people in the data science department, they often didn't have really an interest to learn these things. It was kind of hard to overcome that. So I think like and this is like a very general
So
statement here, but
so
yeah.
so
But
when you
that's
say when you say empower the BI teams, what do you mean exactly? Because
yeah, of
don't you
course.
need to bring data scientists into the BI teams?
Yeah, I like that's what I described in my book, right? So the first part of my book was just covering like
Okay.
fundamentals of machine learning, of data science. So going
Right.
through the data science cycle, what is machine learning actually? What are typical pitfalls? How does machine learning work? What is supervised machine learning, and so on. I think like
Mm-hmm.
you can have a pretty decent crash course in these things and get up to speed pretty
Right.
quickly in a couple of months if you are like dedicated to this topic and if you have a good understanding of the underlying data.
Right.
So that's one practical thing. And the other thing is, and that's what like the second part of my book is to show some use cases. Because in the
Mm-hmm.
end, like when you have a dashboard and you want to do data science, like what do you do? Very often it's all about forecasting. So
Right.
you want to kind of like leave the realm of like historical descriptive analytics and you want to do forecasting, or you want to do something which is more like diagnostic analytics of figuring out why things happen. And it
Mm-hmm.
turns out that in both aspects, you can actually use machine learning slash AI in order to do this. But even if you apply this, you need to know and need to find a way to figure out if what you do with AI is actually performing better compared to the non-AI way. That's why I
Right.
always explain like you have to first of all, you have to have a simple baseline and just compare against that baseline. And this baseline can be like as simple as just taking the mean from time series and use the mean of the last 7 days to predict the next day or whatever, right? And once you
Right.
have this kind of baseline and a like high level understanding of how evaluation metrics work, then you can start applying like these more advanced techniques and actually see what is your like are you able to beat the baseline and by how much. And I think like this is like a whole process, of course, to learn, but I think if you have people in the BI team who are really like eager to learn something and who want to like just upskill themselves, it's like nowadays pretty easy for them to do because like technology is there. Technology is pretty like it's just like very I would say easy to handle. Of course, you need to have a like little like technical how to say yeah you have to kind of endorse this
Mm-hmm.
technical thing a little bit, but we have overcome the very, very early like days of data science where you had to implement every algorithm like by
Right.
hand in like in a program. Like no one does that anymore. Like you have these packages, you have scikit-learn. Even if you are
Mm-hmm.
in R, you have a like a very good
Yeah.
ecosystem around that. So it's kind of like convenient to use these tools, at least once
Right.
you know what you're doing.
Well, my days, and I did some studies in machine learning 20 years ago. And my days we used MATLAB.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the almost the only tool that was. We could also do C or C++ if you wanted to do. That was also possible, but it was mostly MATLAB that you did those things. So I agree, it's much easier today to do machine learning than it was 10 or even 20 years ago, obviously. Not only because of the tools, but also because of the available data and the compute power you have. Um,
And
so um, I mean that's very interesting. So upskilling people in BI is obviously. I agree with you that this is a really great way to implement to bring AI to business intelligence. And um, but how do you? I mean, one the other way around, right? You talked about the other problem. You get the data scientists; they don't want to learn the old stuff, but actually, they. I mean, when you're using AI, when you're implementing, let's say, machine learning, even if it's one of those new fancy models that you have now, well, you need data to train the models, to test them, and you need data governance and all that. So how do you and this is just a little bit of it, a little part of it. There's others, but you need at least you need data and you need governance for that data. Now, how do you bring the data scientists that don't want to do that hard work to actually work together with the data teams that guarantee that this happens? Because if I want to, let's say I am a data scientist and I'm developing a model that predicts what is the next product that the customer will be likely to buy, for example, and because I want to recommend it. And so I developed my model in my Jupyter notebook. It works great, right? I took some extract of the data for the last 6 months and I trained that. It works great. I presented to management. They say, "Oh, great! Now let's bring this live."
Yeah.
And that's where it gets complicated, and many projects actually die at that point because they don't survive from going from
Yeah.
Jupyter Notebook all the way to production. So, do you have any experience that or any guidance that you could give our audience in how to make that process easier?
Yeah, I think the like just from my observation, I think
Yeah,
the hard truth behind this is that a lot of these data science roles where you were supposed to do something in the Jupyter notebook and just like say, okay, like that's my job, and they have disappeared. Like there's actually just two options. The first option is you either like become hands-on and say, okay, now I'm learning to how to implement that myself. You kind of like move further along the like software engineering or data engineering like stack um, of
right.
the job role spectrum. That's option one. And the other option, which is option two, is if you don't want to do this, is to head more into the research space. But I think
Okay.
this intersection where you say, like, I'm this kind of like, um, smart guy in the organization building these sophisticated models, and then I will just throw a pickle file over the fence, and then someone else is doing something with that. It doesn't work. It's and like I've seen a lot of data science teams like disappear literally inside the organization. Not having people kind of fired and leaving the organization, but just like these data science and like innovation teams were kind of like dissolved in this organization and being absorbed by other parts. And this could be the data department. Like this could be just the analytics department. A lot of data scientists have ended up being like working in a data analytics department or data analyst role, which is not bad, by the way, right? Because like we figured
Yeah.
out that the actual the actual work which needed to be done was in the data, was in the space of data engineering and data preparation, data quality, data governance, and so on.
Right.
When your goal was to train your own custom AI models, and I think this is and this was a very
But
very strong.
they become engineers
They
in a
became
sort, or
engineers,
at least
yeah,
partially they become engineers.
yeah,
Either software engineers you mentioned, like operationalizing the models, or data engineers, or both. Is that what you mean?
yeah. Essentially, yes. At least until like last year, until ChatGPT came to the place. I
Okay.
think this was the only way out for data scientists to like just to survive on this job market, to be more technical and learn data engineering stuff. Because again, like the goal back then was to build your own machine learning and AI models. If you were a data scientist and you could not build your own AI model for whatever reason, like you had a difficult time, so you had to figure out what to do. And Yeah, but I think like the focus has now shifted a little bit again. Also, which is not very much in favor for data science. So I think data science
Right.
is really in a bit of a trouble right now. But yeah, but I think we have a completely different field right now. Like yeah, one year after that last year.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe we should just move right away to it. So um I observed the same thing. So I share your opinion that and that's actually the advice that I gave data scientists was always that to okay, so you need to learn, data scientist becomes more valuable the more they are able to deliver end to end. And end to end might mean application in the direction of application, so they become a developer kind of slash AI engineer kind of person, or they move in the direction of data. They become data engineers, more data engineers, and actually they will spend more time doing data work than actual data science, data plumbing, like I like to call it, because that's where a lot of the work is. Um, to actually set up the right data pipelines and the right data governance so that you have the clean, good data that you need to build a model. And so I agree with that. Now, I also observed that shift that you just mentioned, and this shift started probably before the launch of ChatGPT 1 year ago, but it became kind of obvious when ChatGPT was launched. So, what is the shift that we are talking about here? What is that large language models like ChatGPT bring to the table? Let's start from that. That was not there before.
Yeah, so I think the main like shift in paradigm is that before ChatGPTs, when organizations wanted to do something with AI, they were very much in the space of building AI systems themselves.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's more about finding good use cases and using AI systems which are out there. Because it's clear that the average organization just can't build a large language model from scratch. It's just like too expensive to do this,
Yeah.
even if you had the people for this. So what do? You try to find out what are good use cases for this. Well, what are use cases where you can use the APIs from OpenAI or from any other vendor there, which is there on the market, and try to find good use cases for this. And it turns out that most use cases nowadays are like what I call augmented use cases. This is like you have the human in the loop, and this suddenly like changes the game a little bit because data science back then was very much about like integration. You didn't want to have a human in the loop. Like it was all about integration and automation. If you want to have a recommendation system on your website or a churn prediction model, you don't want to have a sales guy sitting somewhere in the middle of the process and like trying to revise some some outputs. Like it's just kind of like batch or online prediction, right? You get like this is your input, this is your output, and there you go, and you just scale that up. But right now we see a situation where we have these very capable AI models but which are very hard to integrate in 100% automated workflows because of all the like difficulties
Mm-hmm.
that these models have. But they work really, really well in these kind of conversational interfaces or in interfaces where you have a human in the loop. And I think this now requires a different skill set. What you need to know now is I think you need to think more in terms of product development and also user interfaces and how do you actually integrate that into business processes, not so
Mm-hmm.
much in like this is our
Yeah.
product that will be the recommendation, but how does actually the business process look like and how can I use AI to to enhance this business process. Like I give you an example, like if you like classical examples in businesses right now using AI is marketing and sales. Like if you have a marketing team or content team that is developing content, like there's a ton of use cases where you can just like augment these use cases with AI, either by like building a tool internally or just by buying something which is out there. And I think this happens not only like in one department but across all different departments in the organization. So the question is now, who's actually controlling this? Are you just leaving the HR department on themselves, the marketing department on themselves, the sales department on themselves, figuring that out, or do you try to kind of like control that in a bit? And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is the space where lots of companies are right now. And this is also like just my personal kind of network where I see a lot of people who have
Mm-hmm.
been kind of former data scientists now move into the direction of being a kind of like, oh, this guy knows something about AI and like helping organizations to like just to overcome this transformation or to manage this transformation.
Hmm.
Building things like internal use case logs, prioritizing things, helping to organization to make the make versus buy decision,
Right.
helping to do some really integrate like low level integrations or like higher level
Hmm.
integrations depending on what kind of system environment you have. But like being kind of like the more on a coordinating role and also more on a role which is very much exposed to the
Right.
user side. So, and that means back then, if you were a data scientist, like 1 year ago, if you were a data scientist who absolutely like hated communicating with people and sitting in Teams meetings, like you're probably better off going to the data engineering route. Of course, you still have to talk to people, but not that much. And once you figured out, I actually like these interactions with other people,
Hmm.
like speaking with business stakeholders, you might be more transitioning into the, I don't even know what the role is called. Like
Consultant.
yeah, consultant or data product managers, that's or what some people call that inside organizations, or like internal AI consultants
Right.
or whatever. I don't know. I think there isn't really a good job terminology for that, but it's
Hmm.
clear that you're this kind of person inside an organization who helps to align these effort, who builds the roadmap, and who also helps to get the use cases like off the ground. Because
Hmm.
and like, the thing is, like with all these new AI technologies, it's really
Hmm.
easy to build a first prototype or to get excited about some capability, but it's really hard to scale that up and put that into production, especially because everything is still so new. And if you can be that like person or part of a
Right.
team inside an organization, I think you can add tremendous value, and also you will have like so much, like you have such an like competitive advantage compared to every like external consultant who could ever come into this company, because ideally the pitfalls and the data and everything in your company that is
Right.
typically like very, very hard to overcome. So this will like put you in a great spot. But again, like this means you will not spend most of your time or most of your day like building models on Jupyter notebooks. No,
Yeah.
you're probably mostly sitting in like team meetings and project meetings and other stuff and trying to
Okay.
bring this alignment in an organization and try to help them make the first steps.
Okay.
Because it's just like there are just so many use cases. You just can't do a deep dive in all these use cases.
Right.
And yeah, I think
So,
this is a very different paradigm right now.
okay, so I mean, and this is with like large language models and generative AI. I mean, is there still a need? At least we see now. At least I still see in our business that there is still a lot of work to be done where this technology actually doesn't apply, or at least doesn't apply yet. For example, anything to do with time series data
Yeah, absolutely.
doesn't apply yet. So I do see in the natural language processing space where basically it kind of everything forget everything you did before in natural language processing, like use cases in chatbots, like assistants and automation or process automation based on natural language processing. You kind of have to forget everything how we did it in the past and look at this new technology, because it's going to change completely what you do. And it's the shift that I see is that it becomes more what you said. um, it's not data science anymore. Basically what you're doing, it's engineering now.
Mm.
The technology is new, is a little bit unpredictable sometimes, so you can't really trust it completely, and that's why you need a human in the loop. At least now, in most cases, you need a human in the loop. Um, but you need to rethink things, and this is where the role, of, for example, of the natural language processing specialist is going to change completely. And people
Yeah.
are actually focusing more, okay, prompt engineering in these new kind of skills. Um, I have a question about BI and data and large language models. I had some conversations in the last couple of months where people ask me, can you use large language models in, for example, in data engineering? can they help in data engineering? Can you talk a bit about that? So one or two things that come to mind. One is in business intelligence, the question that comes over and over is, can you turn natural language questions into database queries, for example? That's one.
Yeah, yeah.
And make this kind of work more, democratize it a bit. That's one. Second topic that comes to the table is data quality. Can you use a large language model to assess data quality? And the third that comes to mind is, can you use large language models to help in data migration? So or data consolidation. So there is, let's say you have to pull data from a transactional database into some other repository like a data warehouse or a data lake. Can you use the large language models to help do that work? Do you have any thoughts, already some conversations, experience with that?
Yeah, so let's start with question one, which is integration of large language models in BI and dashboards. And
Yeah.
I think this has gone quite a long way. So back in my book, when I wrote that like 1 year ago, there was like I had some use cases where I introduced or where I showcased how you can use like the built-in Q&A functionality within Power BI to just like type some queries and get an answer from your data, which is I think nice. But honestly, I do believe that the moment we have a very capable chatbot that will just answer any questions you have on your business in terms of analytics, all dashboards will disappear. Like
Okay.
this is just like dashboards are like no one like I haven't met any single business person who really enjoys looking at dashboards. Honestly, most people they don't care about dashboards. What they care is about, do I need to do something? Is there anything I need
Right.
to do? Like every number, every KPI out there, it's just a proxy for figuring out if we just can continue what we're doing here, or do we need to go left or right? And
Right.
once we are able to just ask a chatbot a question like, is there any like is there anything off with my sales last month, and gives you a very good answer to that, which is backed up by facts, no one will look at dashboards anymore. The only thing is it doesn't work yet. But if I
Right.
just look at the progress we've made from last year to today, I think, well, let's wait what happens in 1 year. Maybe we'll just be at this point in time where everything is still more or less the same like now. But maybe there are other there are other technologies coming out that are helping with that. And I think one key technology could be to make structured data more accessible to large language models. Because how do you currently try to do this, like a Q&A interface for dashboards? We typically use a large language model to take a query, translate this back into a SQL code, and then run the SQL code on the database and fetch the answers. And I think this doesn't really work on very complex and large queries. I think it's good if you have, let's say, a view of, if you have a, if you have a
One
view,
table, one view.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you have one table of one view and you just want to interact with that table, and this could be a working model, because in the end, what does it mean? It would mean that data engineering's job is not now not to build like all these star schemas, which all these like with all the cubes in the back end, which have very fancy or cryptic column names, but just maybe produce a ton of flat tables which have really explicit namings that allows a large language model to query these tables very effectively. But like we don't really know if that works. That would be option one. Option two would be that at some point we find a kind of like interface or middleware that allows large language models to access these data sources in structured in relational databases easier compared to like what we currently have. So to give an example, we have vector databases for text. Maybe we'll figure out that there's something which works pretty good for like structured data, which we just don't know yet.
Right.
I don't know, right?
Well, vector databases use
it works great for
embeddings,
text. Yeah, for vector
right?
embeddings works great for text, and semantics doesn't really work for numbers or
But that
structured
doesn't work
data.
for numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's wait and see what happens. Maybe someone comes up with a good idea and figures out, hey, like why don't we use just this one here, and suddenly it works well with with large language models. So there could be something happening on that front. But I think the best option we have right now is to because I don't think like LLMs are not going away, like they're here to stay. And I also believe
Yeah.
that every business person will rather use a very good chatbot compared to a dashboard when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
like getting quick answers. So what do we do? And I think one way to anticipate this trend is to, and this comes back to data quality,
Mm-hmm.
trying to be really explicit about what your data has or what your data is in the in the storage layer in the data warehouses. And I think we have been talking for decades about metadata and how it like why we should use metadata in our warehouses and
Right.
annotate all these things. But it turned out like no one really did that because it's just too much effort. And I think
Right.
this could be actually also now a good opportunity to bring in LLMs to make all these
Actually do
annotations.
that.
Yeah, to
Yes.
actually do this because
Documentation, right?
documentation.
That's a use case.
Yeah,
Generate documentation.
yeah,
Yeah.
generate documentations, metadata generation,
Right.
also enforcement of certain metadata catalogs and in data tables, all these things which would take like ages and hours of tedious manual work to do for a human. I think this can now be done with LLMs and the human in collaboration
Mm-hmm.
to just document that out. Because like if you have two data warehouses where one data warehouse has just cryptic column names and no documentation and no metadata, and you have warehouse two where you have like telling column names and you have metadata describing what every column is and how every like how the data schema works, and also the schema is nicely documented.
Mm-hmm.
Option two will be much easier for an LLM to make sense of compared to option one. So it's maybe not even like it's maybe
Right.
not close to perfect, but it's much easier. And I think this one is going into the right direction. And even if you're not able to do Q&A on top of that thing, you still have a well-documented
Mm-hmm.
data warehouse. So it's good.
Right.
Right. And I
So
think this is where like LLMs can actually help increase data quality and can help
right.
increase
And that was
these
the point number
things.
two. Yeah.
Yeah, that was point number two, like
Yeah.
coming back to this point.
Yeah.
And I think this is
So
a good advantage.
I'm trying to summarize what you said. So let's say if you what you basically saying is that if people have a good chat GPT that is able to understand the company's data, then you don't need a dashboard, right? Because you ask a question and the chatbot will tell you if everything is fine or if there's anything wrong, that you understand that you have to take action. So that's one point. Um, I tend to agree with that, obviously. Now, if you want to democratize this kind of uh, feature, because in the end you are asking a chatbot to query a database, whatever kind of database that is, but database that actually contains quantitative data, not just text, then that's not an easy thing to do yet, uh, because the technology is not there, at least not yet. And so there might be things that need to be done on the, let's say, on the data side or on the database side to make that data more digestible by a large language model. Like you mentioned, instead of cubes and complex things, you have like more flat, self-documented tables or views that would an LLM would make easier to understand. You can also use LLMs to actually bring the documentation of those data repositories to a level where they are more digestible. So an LLM can help improve the documentation side or the metadata side of a data repository so that another LLM can understand it better. You touch at some point like generating SQL. That's difficult, especially for complex things. So might not be the right way, or at least not yet. Something comes to mind. I listened to a podcast episode, one of my favorite podcasts from Lex Friedman, with where the guest was Stephen Wolfram, and you know Wolfram Alpha,
Mhm.
right? This is pretty impressive stuff. Now, well, what they did in terms of turning a natural language query into some structured query was pretty impressive until LLMs came. So now they were talking about they have some kind of intermediate language, Wolfram language, something in between that actually translate a natural language query into this Wolfram intermediate language that then queries their kind of data representation. do you think also that this could be kind of the way to go, that we'll need some intermediate representation of structured data at some point that allows an LLM actually to generate a query? So it's probably not going to be SQL.
Mm.
It's going to be something more digestible to
Yeah.
an LLM than SQL. Do you think this is the direction that things are moving? Because Wolfram Alpha, they're already trying something like
Mhm.
this. But of course, you need to be able to do this in an enterprise environment or for companies. Do you
Yeah.
think that's a direction?
Yeah,
Creating
I think
some
like
new language that allows you an LLM to talk to a database.
I don't think about it in terms of languages. I
Yeah.
think about it more in terms of kind of microservices or like little services in
Mm-hmm.
between. Think about the whole concept of data mesh in organizations, where you say you have data producers, data consumers, and like
Mm-hmm.
these kind of data product owners for different like entities of your business. And if you have this, I think this is a very good starting point or very good basis to leverage that with LLMs. Because what do you do if you have a data mesh organization and let's say you have a let's say product owner for a recommendation service on your
Mm-hmm.
website where this is documented, it's an API, it takes some kind of like IDs, maybe user ID or product IDs, and the output is another ID. And it's all documented like what it does, what the input is and output is. That is very easy to query for a large language model. And this is what OpenAI is doing with their function calling API, where you
Mm-hmm.
can just say like, this definition of the API of the function, you can just go ahead and query that. And this works really well if the function is kind of like really straightforward and has a narrow focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you do this for analytical purposes, analytical cases, where for example, say, okay, I want to have a revenue, like please give me a revenue, and I want to have this context, like a marketing context or a sales context or finance context, like all these different contexts can like result in a different revenue figure. But there's like this one entity, this one microservice or whatever you call it that controls the calculation of this like revenue metric. Once you have that in place,
So
there's
it's
like
just basically
it,
calling a function then.
it's basically just calling a function. But what you need to do is like before you can do this, you need to have this kind of, I don't even know if you have if you need the terminology data mesh architecture for this, but I think you
Right.
need to break up your kind of like data warehouse or data lake into different kind of like multi like smaller parts where every
Okay.
part handles a certain business domain or a certain product, depending on
Mm-hmm.
what you how you define this. And again, like if it works with LLMs, like great, you can just call them with like natural languages. But if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work with LLMs, it's also great, right? Because you have everything cleaned up. It's very easy to connect these pieces together if you build dashboards, if you build like other reporting metrics. I think it just enhances the overall analytical maturity of your organization if you're able to do this.
Right.
So I think like no matter if LLMs are very good for this or not, I think it's definitely the right direction to go into. Because this is
To
like
go
what
into like an architecture, like
an architecture like this, because
an architecture that allows for such applications, right? And
yeah,
LLM is just an application in the
it's just
end
an
then,
application, yeah, which is interacting with that. And I think this aligns very well with to
or
what
chat is an
companies
application.
yeah, or chat is application. I think this aligns really well to what I see companies doing anyway, like companies who have transitioned from
Mm-hmm.
data warehouses to data lakes with everything that come around that, and then building like these kind of like, you can call it data marts or data mesh organizations when you have owners and consumers like in place for these different
Mm-hmm.
things, these different microservices or functions.
Right.
And this is kind of the like automatically the next level in order
Mm-hmm.
to get trusted and data which is like, yeah, documented, and where you
Okay.
have a contract behind of that where you say,
So
okay, whenever I call that from here, you get the same value. And this is the ideal basis for
so
LLMs in the end.
okay. So let's stay with LLMs because this is the hot
Yeah.
topic. And but I would like to still first to keep the connection. LLMs, structured data, BI, right?
Mhm.
Classic BI. And one of the challenges that I hear, and I keep hearing, and I know understand why the question is always coming up, is the fact that LLMs hallucinate and make things up, especially numbers.
Yeah. That's
So
true. Yeah, that's true.
um now how can you what can you do to mitigate that, right?
Yeah.
Let me just give you a quick example. So let's say I want to ask a question to my CRM,
Mm.
and I have a chatbot that I could use to ask a question to my CRM and say, what were my sales last month, right?
Yeah.
And then can you give me a breakdown of the sales by product and
Mhm.
by region?
Yeah.
Now, this is a very simple query to do, or at least it's not that complex. It doesn't look that complex. Now, if you have a chatbot that actually is going to make that query and then ask an LLM, because the LLM doesn't have the information, so
Mhm.
that's the assumption. The LLM doesn't have the information. The LLM is used to generate an answer.
Yeah.
Um, how do I make sure that the numbers that the LLM then generates
Mhm.
are the actual real numbers and not some
Yeah.
made up numbers?
I think the key is to reducing the LLM to what it's really good at, and this is handling conversations, human-like conversations, but you should
Right.
not let it make the actual calculations. So how do you do this? You need to
Uh,
prepare the actual calculations as much as possible. And again, this can be, for example, this kind of engine or API where the LLM knows, like, for example, let's take this example. A user asks, like, can I get the revenue breakdown for product X by region, USA,
right.
or whatever? So the LLM in this case should be able to recognize that there's this API or this function it can call where it needs to like pull in the product. Maybe it will even figure out that there's another service which translates a product name to a product ID, retrieve the product ID, put that into the different function, and actually pull the values from there and just show the values to the users. And then
Okay.
how do you make sure it actually works? You need to like there needs to be this kind of like source of truth. So there needs to be this like yeah, documentation of the steps that the LLM did, similar to what OpenAI is doing today with Code Interpreter, where you can take a look at the code it actually generated. So that's one way. But I think honestly, this is very much into the future. Like, you know, we are not there yet by I don't know how long. I don't know if we will reach that point, but it will like
Right.
it will still like take a lot of time to get there, I think eventually. One other way, which I have seen, but also like this is just prototyping and POCs, is using the RAG architecture for scenarios like this. So RAG
Mm-hmm.
architecture, retrieval augmented generation, means you just use the LLM as a search engine to get the information. So now what you can do is you can literally just render all your BI reports that you have as PDF files or whatever. It can be like a huge document of like 200 pages, 500 pages, doesn't actually matter. And you
Mm-hmm.
just take the PDF, just take the LLM to search for that information in the pre-rendered, like whatever
Mm-hmm.
document that is. Could be an HTML document, could be a PDF document. Just grab the information from there, which is there. Like imagine like having a BI report which breaks down every product by every sales region, by
Right.
every
So
yeah.
a report that would nobody would read,
Nobody would read the report. It
but
would be like super, super long.
it's meant for
Yeah,
the
it's meant for the LLM. And
yeah,
the
yeah,
LLM could go to this report, fetch the data, show it to user, and provide a source, which is then pointing to this like page in the report where the
yeah,
report actually is generated from a trusted process. So
right,
it's literally like generating a dashboard as
right.
complex and as long as no
So
one would ever read that, but it
okay.
would be accessible for an LLM to get the information from there. And actually, this is something which I have done in like POC or prototype stage, which like works well for at least for a certain domain. Let's say you just look at the marketing KPIs or just look at the sales KPIs because you can kind of control that process. It doesn't really scale to the entire organization. But again, like we're still early and yeah,
Mhm.
but this is something
So
which gives you the security about the data correctness.
so the two options let's go through them a bit. So the second one you're talking about generating reports in text that for the LLM, so that and essentially when you ask a question, you ask a question to the chatbot. The chatbot goes and searches on a
Mhm.
vector database where this report would be stored as vectors, and then you take the result of that search you ask the LLM to generate an answer. The LLM will generate an answer based on that and refer to the place where this was found.
Mhm.
So even if the LLM hallucinates and gives you some wrong facts that could also happen, you can still go and check that the answer that the LLM gave
Yeah, it
you
will always
is
give you a
matches the
source. It will always
yeah,
give you a source, and you click the source and see where the information
right.
is coming from.
So in that case, you would mitigate the hallucination because the LLM might still tell you might still give you a wrong number.
Yeah,
Even
theoretically,
though
but I haven't really seen that for a lot of RAG use cases that we have
okay,
hallucinations based on like I haven't seen really a case where the information was in a document and it was correctly retrieved and then hallucinated or changed by the LLM. Like
okay,
we see hallucinations in places where there is no information in the document and then the LLM kind of like makes something up. I think this
right.
is something which you would need to
Or
mitigate by just telling it, if you don't know, say I don't know, something like
okay. And
this.
that's prompt engineering, right? And that
That's kind of prompt engineering.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it engineering. I would call it prompt hacking, not really engineering.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's not an engineering topic.
but
It's
yeah,
more
but yeah,
crafting.
it's more crafted. Yeah, modern
Yeah.
alchemy.
And the first thing you talked about was also very interesting, but obviously more difficult. That was about um actually generating code that then
Yeah,
calls other systems. And obviously generating code is something that still requires a lot of work in the evolution of the technology. And so I share the same opinion, but I do see limitations in both. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done in this space, and of, let's say, marrying LLMs with BI or with, let's say, structured quantitative data. And this is going to be very interesting.
yeah.
It's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen, because this has a lot of potential, but there is clearly a lot of work to be done. What I
Definitely.
mean, code. If I may ask you a question about code, I'm sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add because I mean we're talking about LLMs being able to query data and this and this. Like, just to be sure, this is all super early. Like, it takes a ton of work
Yes.
to do this. It's nothing which you just plug and play and it works. And I think before you go that way, I think there's one question that you and your organization have to ask yourself before you actually invest all the time into these efforts. And the
Yeah.
question is, are you willing to look at data and willing to change? Because like we have seen so many organizations that want to be data driven and whatnot, but actually no one in like top management cares about actual data, or just very little. Like they care some things that the CFO is telling them, but not so much about like everything else, which is very coming down from a like very operational level. And if we don't
Right.
have this mindset, it's just like it's just a wasted effort to go for this way, right?
Right.
I do believe that in the end, like every company needs to kind of like embrace this route because will just be more higher competition out there. But again, like if your organization is not ready for this, like there's no point in trying to make it happen with LLMs.
Right.
So yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to add
Mm-hmm.
on top of that. But I do think, and I think this is where LLMs have a really good place. If you are already an organization which like there are these different kind of like data maturity stages, right? There are different
Mm-hmm.
definitions out there, but in the end, it's all coming from like very being a very data beginner up to like being a data fluent organization. And a lot of organizations right now are at this point where they have invested into a something like a analytics center of excellence, or some
Mm-hmm.
data analyst, where they have like maybe 10% of their people or 15% of their people in their organization kind of like data ready and like data like professionals or
Mm-hmm.
aware, but they struggle to really get adoption for the last like 80% of all the workforce out there. And you can't just
Right.
like turn all the other 80%, you can't turn them into data analysts. It just doesn't work. Of course, you can send them to a data literacy boot camp for 1 week, but in the end, it just doesn't make any impact. So how do you get the other 80%, which is the majority of your business users, to adopt analytics and be like insight or data driven? How do you do this? And I think this is where LLMs can play a major role, because they will allow you to build on top of the like already pretty good data fundament which you have and make that more
Mm-hmm.
accessible to your organization. Because again, like 80% of these people, a lot of them don't even want to look at dashboards and like Excel pivot tables and so on. It will be super hard to like sell them on this idea. And using LLMs, I think, can be a convenient way to access this data. Because in the end, these people, they don't want data. They just want to get an answer to a question which they are having right now, which could be something as profane as, what's actually my conversion rate on my last email campaign, something like this, right? Maybe they already have that information, then it's fine. Maybe not. Maybe they have an information, or maybe they have a question which is more related to, what should be actually, like, is that actually good, or what can I improve? And I think these are all very good entry points where we can leverage the power of LLMs to help them augment their own workflows. But I think you need to have a certain fundament or certain like baseline level of data analytics.
What maturity level does an organization need then?
Yeah, again, like there are different definitions on I think you need to have at least an organization where you have a centralized data department. Because that's what the stage that every company goes through. Like, first of all, like, you don't have anyone doing something with data, but like, you can't go from no one is doing anything with data to everyone is just becoming data driven. Like, it just doesn't work. You have to have a step in between where you are centralizing the efforts, where you have an analytics center of competence or anything else, where you have things like data governance and you have a certain like data quality control. Like, this is centralized. But again, once you have this, I think you're in a good spot to go to the next stage and ask yourself, okay, how do I actually, now that I have my, I don't know, like 20 data analysts here in my organization doing amazing things, but how do I bring that to the rest of the organization? And I think this would be a good timing to think about these things like, AI and LLMs. I don't think you need that before. If you don't have any data analytics kind of entity in your organization, you can't go for the AI route. I think it doesn't work. So I think you need to have that before.
So is this the kind of work you do with your company, with RAPYD.AI? Is this the kind of advice that you give to customers?
Yeah, at least
you talked earlier about helping figuring the role of data scientist internal, was a bit more understanding what use cases you can apply. Is that also what you try to help companies with, to understand, for them to understand a bit better how these technologies can be applied?
Yeah, so I would describe it, at least nowadays, more in a way like I help companies who stumble into AI do AI in a structured and like straightforward way. Because the way most companies nowadays hear about AI is that some executive or leader, overheard something about ChatGPT or any use case out there, or went to a conference, or went to the last like vendor event and is now super excited about that AI thing. And what I do then normally is when they approach me and say, hey, we want to do this and this. Like, for example, we want to build our internal ChatGPT, we want to build our internal LLM. I tell them, say, okay, like, do you have 100 million to spend on this? Like, mostly they don't have, right? So what do we do? So my job nowadays is often, first of all, to zoom out a little bit and say, okay, what challenges are we actually facing? And this zooming out, this is something that I do in this AI design sprint, which I offer as a like first intro to these companies. This could be on an organizational level, where we zoom out to the organizational level and say, okay, where do we actually have big pain points in different departments or business units? Or if the contact is more coming from a business department, like a sales or marketing department, we would look at the high level process in that department and sub processes that are in this field of responsibility, and figure out where can we identify pain points and bottlenecks for the business. Pain points are really things that are hurting. They are aware of those problems and they want to remove these problems. Like, for example, it could be that their customer service takes forever, right? So that could be a different pain point. But it could also be a bottleneck. A bottleneck is something which I describe as something which they are not aware of, that this could be a problem. So this could be, for example, let's say you have an e-commerce shop, and it happens still very often B2B settings where there are no recommendations in place. So I would say, let's try recommendations. And of course, I would not suggest directly jump into the AI solution and just do AI recommendations, but I would say, hey, you don't do recommendations, but typically recommendations can help you to improve your revenue by X%. So let's assume you have X% revenue from your shop. Would that be helpful? Yes or no? In many cases it is. And then we make a plan on how to get there, like having the first baseline implemented and then like going from there to having a, whatever kind of like more sophisticated system that will help them achieve this. So yeah, like I kind of like, first of all, try to zoom out and say, okay, what are we actually doing here? Because it's just so easy these days to get lost in different use cases that are very easy or look very easy to like prototype, but in the end are very hard to scale up and also very hard to actually bring value to the organization in the end because the organization is not ready for this.
I agree. I mean, I have the same experience, and we do at Two Impulse, we do offer a similar kind of engagement model where we help them first, depending on their level of maturity, how mature their ideas are. Sometimes we help them first understand what is the problem, and then talk about solutions. Tobias, thank you for joining us today. The conversation could go on for hours. I can see that. Very interesting, very good insights. Is there anything you'd like to add? Any piece of advice that you'd like to add before we end our episode today?
I don't know. I always say when it comes to AI, think big, but take small steps. So I think it's really important to really internalize that you need to be able to ship in increments and you need to be able to have this iterative mindset because that's coming very back to the beginning of the discussions that we have. It's very hard to plan AI nowadays just from the end backwards. We can't say that, okay, next year by December, we want to have this internal LLM and, what do we do to get there? It's like you can have that as a North Star and as a high level vision, but you need to be able to take very small steps which go into the right direction, but then also be able to be flexible along the way. Just with everything that is happening in AI right now. So even now, I think it's very hard. It's a very hard time to make huge investments into AI because you just don't know what will be around the corner. Maybe next year, this time, it will be the same as this time, but maybe there's like the next big thing, right, in AI happening. I don't really believe that actually. I think it will be like a little better than we currently have, but I don't expect like another ChatGPT breakthrough next year.
Another revolution.
Yeah, but who knows? I think it's just in terms of like financial planning and IT spending, I think it's very hard to, for example, commit these days to build that super duper expensive AI solution and just hope that we don't have AGI next year. So that's why I think
computing.
or quantum computing next year. So that's why I think like going into these like embracing that mindset of thinking big, but also being able to take small steps, also being able to ship things like iteration or sprint after sprint, whatever a sprint might be for your organization
quickly.
I think quickly, yeah. Just like be able to do this. I think this is
the same. It's the same kind of advice we are giving our customers and partners: is don't invest too much at once. Baby steps, ship quickly, try something quickly, and because that will reduce the risk. You will learn what works, what doesn't. Don't expect too much. Think human in the loop, especially in the LLM cases, because there's always a degree of uncertainty there. And we have a couple of conversations about generating documentation for code, looking at code quality. Well, you can't just blindly trust code generated by an LLM that then goes into your software. You need to have a human checking it, and this is something that we need to kind of repeat over and over. So I can relate. I completely agree with what you said. Don't get locked too quickly to one specific vendor. That's another, because we don't know what's going to happen with the majority of vendors out there today, not even with the big ones. We watched OpenAI rise and fall and then rise again in a single weekend. I thought, okay, this is the end of OpenAI if 80% of the employees will, and then Monday it was back again. So even OpenAI, it's very uncertain what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
So I can relate. Thank you, Tobias, again for joining us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
You for listening and for watching us. If you're watching us on YouTube, please give us a like here. If you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so on, give us a nice review. and hope to see you again next time. Thanks again for listening, watching. Thanks, Tobias, for joining us.
Thank you.